diagonal skintlings, agitated cats, and a Nether Solar, the architecture of Haveringland Church. This talk, previously given in September 2025 as part of the Heritage Haveringland Festival, focuses on the history of Haveringland Church and its predecessors. I'll point out some key features and say a little about our recent project to repair and improve what is now a festival church and community hub. Please visit the church, where you can find self-guided tours on your phone, an interactive heritage hub, and a paper church guide and children's trail, so you can explore the church and other local heritage further. First, the setting of the church. It was originally set amongst the wooded parkland close to the former Haveringland Halls, the third of which was located about half a mile to the northeast. The hall and its adjoining land became the site of the RAF Swannington Airfield, built and operated in the last few years of the Second World War. This resulted in the trees surrounding the church being removed and the perimeter track of the airfield coming very close to the church. Here's a photograph showing a Mosquito aircraft parked up in front of the church, which has camouflage on the tower. You can still see the metal fixings for this netting on the outside of the tower. As a result, the church surroundings today are largely open fields with some stands of trees, including some marking the main runways. It is known as the Church in the Fields. In the last few years, Hillside Animal Sanctuary has purchased the surrounding fields, and these are now cultivated as fenced pasture for rescued horses and other animals. The church and its unique setting are held in affection by many local people and visitors from further afield. The church itself is a mix of ancient and more modern elements. The oldest is the round tower, which is thought was built in 1086, using a mix of flints, Roman bricks and tiles, freestone, iron-bound conglomerate, bound together with lime mortar. The tower is one of, if not the oldest, in Norfolk. Why a round tower? Well, the theories on this stress the lack of local stone as a building material, so a shape that's capable of being bound together with irregular flints makes sense. But it's also thought that historically round towers had some cultural and symbolic meaning. Of course, this may have been because of the necessity of building such a shape in the first place. Here's a layout plan to introduce some terms I'll be using today. Here's the nave, north and south aisles, north and south transepts, a chancel which contains the altar table, and a reredos, the panel behind the altar. It was mainly built around 1858 under the patronage of Edward Fellows, the owner of the former Haveringland Hall. If you're interested, there is another narrated presentation about the Haveringland Halls available on this YouTube channel. So what do we know of the church's history? Looking back in time, we have a couple of images of the church prior to its rebuilding. The first is in a painting which shows the church alongside the second Haveringland Hall. This painting was kindly supplied by the current Lord Poltimore, a relative of a family that rented the hall before the Second World War, by former Haveringland resident Desmond Tubby. We don't know the artist or timing of this painting, but it's probably sometime in the 18th century. As you can see, the tower has no battlements on the top like today, and possibly has a lead-covered roof. The original church was largely rebuilt in the 1300s. The north doorway dates from about 1300, and the west windows of both the tower and north aisle seem to belong to the 14th century, built by Sir Roger Ginley or de Bilney. In 1528, during the dissolution, the church lands were seized and legally conveyed to Thomas Hearn, Lord of Haveringland, in 1583. Around 1740, the notes of a Thetford antiquary, Tom Martin, described the tower, a three-bay nave arcade, or series of arches, with two round and one square pier, the columns between the arches, a north chapel including part of the north aisle, and a brass matrix, that's the recessed area in a stone slab where a monumental brass was once fixed. These brasses, often featuring figures, inscriptions or heraldry, were crafted from a brass-like alloy called latten and inlaid into the stone. Over time, the brass plates could be removed, leaving behind the matrix as evidence of their former presence. It may be that the reference to a brass matrix refers to the stone slab we have in the south transept, which possibly commemorates Sir Roger de Bilney. The North Chapel was dedicated to St Lawrence and was linked to the Mountjoy Priory that once stood off Abbey Lane in the village. Here's an image of St Lawrence and an old Ordnance Survey map showing the location of the priory. The priory eventually became linked to the convent in Wymondham and became a cell for a prior and black canons. They were of the Augustinian order and wore black cloaks or habits. The second church image is a lithograph by the well-known church illustrator John Burney Ladbroke, thought to be drawn in around 1830. This shows the church as having no south aisle nor any chancel. It appears to show a north aisle and chapel or transept in place. The church chancel was demolished sometime between 1740 and 1830. A commissioner reported in 1741 that the chancel of Haveringland Church was in a ruinous condition and was intended to be taken down, since a storm on November 1st, 1740 had rendered it irreparable, because the roof had almost all blown off and the walls were much shattered. A licence was requested to take down the chancel and build a gable end, which would make the building much handsomer and would be a less expense than repairing the chancel. It's possible that North Aisle was rebuilt in 1755. So the church was smaller than today and in a fairly poor state of repair when Edward Fellow set about rebuilding it in 1858. As I've already said, the only structural elements of the earlier church that remain are the tower and the north aisle wall, shown on the left. You can see on this that apart from the buttress supporting it, that the flintwork is much cruder than the southern side of the building, shown on the right. The door opening on the left and the window opening at the western end of this on the right are also from the earlier church. I'll say more about this window shortly. We know a little about the people involved in the project from research carried out about 6 years ago as part of the work in support of our repair and improvement project. The architect for the rebuild was Richard Armstrong, who had been the clerk of works for the new Haveringland Hall, built around 15 years earlier. It seems that the builders William Bartram and Son of Aylsham were involved in repairs to the tower, selling lead, presumably from the roof of the former church, levelling of the churchyard, installation of gates, etc. So at least some of the preparatory work for the main rebuild. It may be that a John Murray was the builder of this new church, but the records are hazy. We know that William Ollett was responsible for all the carpentry and furniture. George Hedgeland painted the windows in the transepts and the chancel, and William Wales created the panels in the east window and 2 south aisle windows. What are some of the notable features that we see today? The round tower and some adjoining walls, as I've said, date to 1086. It includes a battlemented parapet wall to the top, which was enhanced at the time of the rebuilding of most of the church in the 19th century. The Ladbroke lithograph shows the earlier church had a less elaborate set of battlements. You can see that flints have been shaped to fill the panels created by the stonework. The bricks inside these battlements have diagonal skintlings. These are the marks on the bricks showing the way they were stacked for drying before firing. The diagonal angle was only current up to around 1780, many years before the church rebuild and the added battlements. It might be that the bricks were reused from the demolished second Haveringland Hall. There are only 2 other examples of these marks found in Norfolk. Here is a picture of a diagonal skintling on the left and a horizontal skintling on the right. Outside, the tower has a diamond-shaped feature on its west side, another less prominent on the northern side. It seems likely that the western shape once housed a clock. Perhaps like this, and that the other might have had another clock interconnected to this, or perhaps another feature laid against the wall. On the right is a photo inside the tower, A U-shaped opening in the ceiling shows where the pendulum probably once hung. The tower's western window dates from around 1400 and shows its lower section bricked up. During the repair works, the shape of a bricked up area below this window was discovered, as were two recesses on both sides of the walls, which suggests they might have once held a wooden screen. This possibly means that the tower could have been accessed by the priest through a doorway below the window, and he would have had a private screened-off chamber referred to as a Nether Solar, mentioned in 1535. The tower houses a belfry which has 4 bell openings, thought to be in their original shape. 3 bells, not used for some time, with old inscriptions are present, one of which was recast in 1856. One of these is thought to be St. William's Bell, commemorating the baptism and possibly birthplace of St. William of Norwich, whose medieval murder gave rise to the first recorded blood libel against the Jews. It has an inscription in Latin, "Holy Martyr William, pray for us," with a date of 1874. Here's a painting of St. William from St. Mary Magdalene Church in Norwich, which can now be seen in the remodelled Norwich Castle, well worth a visit if you haven't yet been there. William of Norwich is thought to have been born and baptised in Haveringland. The other feature which had a connection to the St. William story is the window opening, not the glass, at the western end of the north aisle, shown on the right here. A description of the window that once stood here portrays a colourful picture of the William story. It reads, "A man on horseback met by an old hermit. He loads him in a sack and hides him in a lane. Divers monks have digged up a naked corpse, the body laid in a fine coffin or shrine. A monk and divers cripples kneeling by it, setting on a cover adorned with much old-fashioned spired work compartments. A priest sitting with an open book lying upon his knees. A man kneeling before him, another standing, and another kneeling behind him with an encircled head. In another, a man having a dagger by his side. Looks something ghastly. An old man on horseback takes him by the hand, another turning his head away as affrighted. Another pane hath a youth with an encircled head drinking out of a cup. A woman standing by, and lower, an old man." Outside, at the junctions of the north and south aisle roofs and the tower, are carvings of 2 agitated cats, possibly medieval. These were often put on churches to ward away evil. As I've said, most of the current structure is a reconstruction and extensions dated to 1858, so a relatively early example of Victorian rebuild. The additions to the main elements of the earlier church are the southern aisle and transept. The nave has 4 bays and an arcade which divide it from the aisles. All the corbels, the stone faces that support the bottoms of the arches, appear to be different, featuring kings and queens, priests, and 2 angels at the entrance to the chancel. The main roof over the nave, shown on the right here, has alternating arch braces and scissor trusses. On the left you can see the roof of one of the aisles. The font, located near the doorway to the tower at the west end of the church, is octagonal and has a 13th century top on a 19th century base. Turning to the windows, which are extremely colourful, the southern wall of the chancel has 2 bays, both with decorated style windows. There are no north windows in the chancel. The other windows are also a version of the decorated style. The east window shown here is especially fine. Outside, at the eastern window outer arch ends, are stone carvings of the head of Queen Victoria on the left and Bishop Pelham, who was the Bishop of Norwich from 1857 until 1893. So that's the main features of the church building. What about the fixtures and fittings? In the chancel, the ornately carved wooden altar is Victorian, but looks backwards in style. Here's a close-up. The reredos is similarly elaborate and extends across the full width of the chancel. The panels show the Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments based on Georgian practice. There are two ornately carved chairs near the altar, which are believed to date from the reordering in the mid-19th century. These are upholstered in velvet with a stencilled or painted design. They cost £28, over £3,000 in today's money. We also have two large candlesticks donated to the church in memory of Diana Broughton, née Fellows, a member of the de Ramsey family, by her husband, Major Broughton. The fact that there are stalls included in the chancel is unusual at such an early date. You might think that they were intended for the noble Fellows family to occupy, were it not for a substantial family pew in the south transept. The inclusion of these stalls in the chancel meant that there was no room for a clergy seat in its usual location. This was therefore combined with a reading desk next to the chancel arch. Its square form again looks back to the Georgian period. The chancel floor has more decorative tiling than the rest of the church, a familiar aspect of the period, but not extravagantly so. The pulpit, reading desk and open seats are all of fine carved oak. Textiles, estimated to date to the late 19th century, consist of a red altar superfrontal, pulpit fall and lectern fall. The floor is paved with encaustic tiles. The seating in the nave is pews of oak. These are extremely well carved and set on wooden platforms. Those at the southeast corner are divided in the middle, either because they were rented or because they were intended for the servants from the hall. The rest are undivided. The rear seats have black traceried backs of exceptional quality. The ends are poppy head finials. Before the recent repairs and improvements project, there were benches at the rear of the church. These were relatively plain. They may be contemporary with the main nave pews and were apparently used by the headmistress and possibly children from the local school. Probably later in date were the pews that used to be at the crossing point, as they sat on a wooden floor which itself sat on the tiled floor of the church. They have metalwork suggesting Art Nouveau style, so possibly late 19th or early 20th century, possibly installed once the organ was in place in 1888. They've been divided up and adapted for continued use in the church, though they're pretty heavy to move. The south transept contains the three-sided private pew of the de Ramsey family. The ends are carved with heraldic devices, a lion's head in memory of a later Lord de Ramsey who died in 1925. It might once have had a bookrest or division from the nave. This lion is also on the chancel bench ends along with another, more complex coat of arms, probably a combination of various families including the Fellows, so some further research for someone. There was also a low screen running in front of the organ, which has now been divided into two, with the lower section fixed to the side of the organ, where it seems likely that a previous dividing rail once stood. This is elaborately carved with a figure. St. William, an angel, survives on one end. I wonder who it is. The north transept contains the late 19th century organ and also a vestry separated from the church by a tall wooden screen, seen here. The recent improvements have seen the vestry divided into two, with an all-access toilet on one side and vestry cum utility space to the east. The organ was given to the church in memory of Edward Fellows, the first Lord de Ramsey, by his children upon his death in 1888. The organ bears a plate Norman Bross and Beard, but is believed to have been built using second-hand parts of an organ made by Alfred Kirkland. A report by Richard Bauer of a pipe organ company concludes that it, quote, is a fine instrument, attractive looking and with good pipe work and tracker action. The organ that preceded this was smaller and was gifted to Brandeston Church, where it can still be seen. And here's a picture of the old parish chest, now located in the tower, used to store important documents and records, possibly 17th or 18th century in style. And we have a number of monuments and plaques. I'll just mention 2 or 3 that are trickier to see. I've already mentioned the large stone with the indent of a knight in armour and an inscription in Lombardic letters in the south transept. This is possibly the gravestone of Sir Roger de Bilney, who paid for the building of the north aisle in the 13th century. Behind the organ, on the east wall of the north transept, is a brass plaque in memory of Alice Townsend, quotes, late wife of John Davy of Mountjoy, Esquire, who died January the 21st, 1561. The plaque bears a shield with a coat of arms that is rather difficult to see. It would probably have been visible when the previous organ was in place. We also have a stone in the north transept to the Herne family, former lords of the manor from the 18th century, seen on the left here. More recently, a monument marking the designation of the church as a memorial to the 100 Bomber Support Group is shown on the right. And finally, what about our recent repair and improvement project? Well, the project really began back in 2016. The building was in a sorry state. Its round tower eroding, roofs leaking, drains not flowing, broken windows and stonework damaged or missing. Regular services were rare, and congregations could usually be counted on the fingers of one hand. As the church is the only public building in the village of a couple of hundred souls, we concluded that trying to operate as a normal church would not be feasible. So we agreed to explore the festival church model. This meant we would need a minimum of 6 services a year, which opened up the possibility of the building meeting other needs. So since 2016 we've raised over £500,000. And it's been a challenging journey with 3 applications for our main funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, along with a significant increase in cost due to world events a year or 2 ago. But our funding success isn't just down to applications to charities and so on. We saw the need to build up community involvement in the project, and so a couple of years ago we created Haveringland Together. This group is officially part of the church organisation, a sort of friends group. But it's become a key to fundraising at a local level, and most importantly, for building wider involvement in the project. We don't pretend that our approach and ideas will be relevant everywhere. Plenty of churches have village halls nearby, which perhaps makes diversification more difficult. But we hope that what we are achieving will be of interest and perhaps help other churches that are struggling to survive. So what you see today is a building that's had major repairs. To the tower, to the windows and walls, to the roof and drains, we have an automatic opening and locking device so we can be open every day. And wheelchair users can now get access without the need to tackle steps up at the entrance. We have a new welcome area with storage cupboards and a notice board. And having removed some pews at the back and moved some at the crossing point, we now have a more flexible layout, plus new chairs and tables to complement the remaining pews. And we also have an interactive heritage hub with puzzles and games and lots of things to find out about local heritage. We have a new, much more versatile lighting and sound system, as well as cameras for CCTV and live video streaming. Plus an all-access toilet and baby changing area and a servery to provide refreshments. I think we've managed to strike a sensitive balance between improving the functioning of the building and conserving its historic features, some stretching back nearly 1,000 years. I hope that you agree. There remain some important features that need repairs: the 3 bells, renovation of the organ, repairs to the east window, churchyard walls and so on, so further fundraising will be needed. The funds we have secured include support for a programme of events and activities. Several of these are heritage related and others are more community minded or about promoting health and well-being, to help address social isolation and loneliness, for example. We've also initiated a project that seeks to improve biodiversity at a landscape scale, the Nature North of Norwich project. And we're hosting a national conference in 2026 called Reimagining Rural Churches, which will bring together people directly involved in festival churches or in developing other ways that churches can be turned into sustainable centres. To conclude, I'd like to pay tribute to our local historian Lorna Wilson for her great work in researching and presenting some fascinating stories and information about our local heritage, which you can find out more about on the Interactive Heritage Hub at the back of the church and also on the Haveringland Chronicles website. You can also view some of the talks and other events we've held here on YouTube. Just search for Haveringland Church and Hub. I'm also very grateful to all those involved in our building project, and especially the National Lottery Heritage Fund, lottery players and other donors for their fantastic financial support. Thank you.